Okay, so this week we read The Ethics of Authenticity in Social Media Influencers and the Production of Sponsored Content. So with the increase in social media marketing in the travel industry, it's getting a lot harder for audiences to distinguish whether or not content is sponsored. And research actually shows that when sponsorships are disclosed in online content, audiences still have trouble distinguishing it as organic content. Because of this, this raises a lot of ethical questions, such as, are the SMIs being authentic about the brand they're promoting? Do they really use the products? Are they enjoying it? Do they think their audience will benefit off of it, etc.? Questions like these lead to skepticism behind the ethics of social media influencers making sponsored content, as there is no formal ethical framework that these influencers have to abide by. So in the article, it argues that influencer marketing is not necessarily unethical, but it argues that the ethical principles influencers use are often misunderstood. So in this study, Wellman, Stoll, et al., they interviewed 20 creators and stakeholders in the travel industry to explore the ethical framework the influencers use when deciding on which companies they promote in order to ensure that they are ethically engaging in sponsored content. So by examining the travel and tourism media industry, researchers were able to gain a better understanding of how SMIs use authenticity as a guiding ethical framework or principle in their sponsored content. So why is this study important? Well, in the traveling industry, influencers play a big role in advertising by promoting destinations and brands in their online content. And as audiences, we expect influencers to be authentic with us by sharing genuine opinions as well as disclosing brand endorsements. But however, even when these brand endorsements are disclosed and audiences were able to identify the sponsored content, some audiences still had trouble distinguishing it from organic content. And as a result, sponsored content became a very effective way of marketing, as most audiences don't view this content as an advertisement, more so as an organic post. So this raises a lot of ethical questions as to this can kind of lead users who don't know any better to being misled. So questions would be like, are these social media influencers being authentic about the brands they're promoting? Are these influencers, do they actually think the sponsorship will benefit their audience, or are they just promoting it just to get paid? So this kind of creates tension on how these influencers display and disclose paid-for content while also maintaining audience trust. So although the influencer industry lacks a formal ethical code, norms like authenticity help influencers remain ethical while working for the interests of both their advertisers and audience. So in the research study, it explores how influencers use the concept of authenticity as a guiding ethical principle when choosing, which brands to work with, what type of content they are making, and how to disclose this partnership to the audience. So as stated before, this research study focuses on the travel and tourism sector, where influencers play a really big role in promoting destinations online. So in the study, they conducted 20 in-depth interviews with travel influencers and industry stakeholders, and this sample consisted of 14 women and 6 men. So they asked some things like what their professional background was and what they did in the travel industry. They then asked them about sponsored content and the ethical considerations they took into account when creating a relationship with the commercial brand. And then they concluded the survey with questions about challenges they face in the tourism industry. So that last question kind of allowed researchers a more comprehensive exploration of the ethical framework that guided SMIs towards choosing a commercial company. So in the study, it identified the concept of authenticity as the core ethical principle when discussing the ethics of sponsored content. So their findings reported that SMIs used authenticity as an ethical framework when choosing which content to sponsor and how they go about it and what kind of content they make. And because SMIs create authenticity in their brand through identity performances, think of like a vlog or a day in my life video, they rely on their understanding of authenticity as an ethical driving principle to create such content, as they believe that engaging in these sponsorships still allows for sponsored content to center their personal brand and audience around it. So in the study, it identifies authenticity as a central ethical principle, which is based off of 2 tenets, which is being true to oneself and being true to one's audience. With this in mind, this framework prioritizes brand identity and audience relationship while simultaneously allowing them to profit off of sponsored content designed to benefit brands and destinations. So SMIs were able to apply the ethical framework of authenticity to sponsored posts by 1, choosing which brands to work with, 2, what kind of content they're going to create, and 3, disclosing this relationship with their audiences. So the first section explores how influencers ethically sponsor posts by deciding which brands they want to work with for paid opportunities. In the study, they found that influencers were guided by a desire to create content that resonated with their audience's interests and needs. For example, someone who goes snowboarding a lot would do a paid sponsorship with a snow mountain resort, as this kind of fulfills their audience's expectations for snowboarding videos. So they do this in an effort to maintain brand credibility and image, with a lot of influencers noting that they would turn down certain sponsorships because they felt as if it didn't fit their identity. And they would do this because they want to remain authentic by aligning with audience expectations. So for a lot of influencers, it's not worth sacrificing your reputation by working with brands that don't fit their audience or online identity. So influencers view this commitment to authenticity as a financial and ethical decision regarding posting sponsored content, while many noted that accepting sponsorship solely for financial gain is viewed as unethical or an ethical misstep, as it can damage their relationship with their audience. So the second sub-theme of authenticity as an ethical framework focuses on how SMIs are contracted to create certain kinds of content. However, this does not typically dictate the substance of the content or how influencers tailor content to fit their audience's needs. So viewing sponsored content through the lens of authenticity helps tourism influencers decide what content to produce. The article states that when influencers put their audiences and personal brands first, their work is both authentic and ethical. However, when influencers allow commercial brands' goals to drive the content, then it becomes inauthentic and unethical. So one way that social media influencers apply the ethical frame of authenticity to content creation is posting materials that they view as useful to their audiences. For example, a snowboarder influencer might promote a jacket that does a good job at keeping them warm. However, critics and other SMIs also pointed out ethical breaches in sponsored content making. And an example they used in the article was a travel influencer waking up early to shoot content at a spot that's usually populated. So this is a breach in the ethicality of sponsored posts, as it did not highlight the reality of traveling, which includes crowded areas. So with sponsored content, some influencers are actually scrutinized, as they may omit negative aspects of the trip in their sponsored content, such as bad relationships, destination markers, poor organization, fresh trip, etc. But SMIs justify this as they believe that including this content does not focus on aspects of the trip that audiences are, looking for or are likely to experience. As these influencers' brands focus more on positive insights that can help audiences make travel decisions. Although omitting certain details may seem inauthentic and unethical, SMIs do it in order to meet audience expectations. So doing so would allow the SMIs to remain authentic to their audiences, as they are fulfilling audience expectations of travel inspiration, ideas, or other subjects that aligned with the audience's goals or expectations. If an SMI does feel the need to include negative experience in their content, however, some have reported doing so through using subtle tones or language cues to indicate that their experience was not up to par with what their expectation was. So another way that SMIs use authenticity as an ethical framework when sponsoring posts is through the disclosure of brand sponsors. So some influencers see disclosure as a necessary mean to ensure transparency and maintain audience trust, even though they acknowledge that advertisers may not prefer this approach. Despite this, some SMIs will still prioritize audience trust over advertiser preferences and choose to turn down or not create sponsored content if it does not align with the audience expectations or brand identity. For some influencers, disclosure is not a major ethical concern because they do believe that their sponsored content serves the audience. Think of like a NASCAR race having sponsored stickers on cars. So these influencers believe that their audiences are not concerned about being showed sponsored, but they're more concerned about engaging with the content that's being made and if it serves their personal interests. So these influencers are less concerned with the specifics of disclosure language, assuming that their audience understands general terms like sponsored by or in partnership. So in general, for many influencers, the key ethical concern is ensuring that sponsored content aligns with their personal brand and audience expectations. Also, some influencers may view disclosure as a legal obligation, while others believe that it's an essential part of maintaining transparency and long-term credibility with their followers. So with everything we just learned in mind, I did have a few discussion questions for you guys. My first question goes back to the idea of omitting negative information from the audience. A lot of people argue that leaving out certain information is dishonest in terms of possibly misleading consumers who are interested in engaging with the sponsorship. While influencers in the study are saying that even though it's not honest in nature, doing so remains honest and authentic to the brand or image or persona that they're giving off. So in this case, a lot of influencers will put audience expectation above audience well-being. So going back to that, my first question is, do you think that omitting certain information is the right thing to do? Yeah, it may help you stay true to your brand, but it can also be misleading. So I just wanted to ask that. My second question is, what other ethical considerations come from the lack of formal ethics codes for influencers? For example, other than authenticity, what else do you think drives an SMI to view a sponsorship as ethical? Do you think like political view comes into play with this? And then my last question is, are there any examples you've seen of SMIs putting advertiser expectations before audience expectations? For example, did their content meet the needs of the brand, or did it meet the needs of their audience? And if you have seen something like this, how did it make you feel in terms of credibility? But that's about it for this week. These are my references, and I can't wait to hear what you guys think. Thank you.